Wellness Rhythm Show. Find your rhythm. Live your wellness.
Y'all, let me tell you something nobody warned me about. I turned 42 last spring, and it was like my body got a memo I never received. Sleep, suddenly different. Recovery after a workout, longer. My metabolism, acting like it's working a part-time schedule. And I kept thinking, is this just me?
Right, here's what I've learned. It's absolutely not just you. There's actually a fascinating body of research suggesting the 40s represent what scientists are now calling a genuine biological inflection point. Not a slow, gradual decline, more like a gear shift.
A gear shift. That is exactly what it feels like. And today we're digging into why that happens, what's actually going on under the hood, and most importantly, what you can actually do about it.
And we'll be honest about what the evidence supports and what's just noise, because there is a lot of noise around this particular decade.
So let's start with the basics. When we say the 40s are an inflection point, what are we actually talking about? Because I think a lot of people hear that and assume we're just describing aging, and it's more specific than that, right?
Considerably more specific, a landmark study published in Nature Aging in 2024, led by researchers at Stanford, including Professor Michael Snyder, tracked over 100 adults longitudinally and found that molecular and microbial changes don't happen at a steady pace. They found dramatic, non-linear shifts clustered around two ages, 44 and 60.
Non-linear, meaning it's not a gentle slope, it's more like stairs.
Precisely. At the 44 cluster, they observed significant changes in lipid metabolism, cardiovascular-related molecules, and even skin and muscle composition markers. It wasn't gradual drift, it was a notable jump.
And as someone who is living in that window right now, this both validates everything I've been feeling and is slightly terrifying.
I'd call it clarifying rather than terrifying, because knowing that these shifts are real, measurable, and expected, that's actually actionable information.
Okay, so here's the thing though. Let's talk about why this happens. Because I feel like most of us reach our 40s and assume we just didn't try hard enough. Like, if I'd just eaten better in my 30s?
And that guilt is largely misplaced. There are genuine hormonal and physiological drivers here. For women, perimenopause typically begins in the mid-40s, sometimes earlier. The National Institute on Aging notes that declining estrogen doesn't just affect reproductive function, it influences bone density, cardiovascular health, brain function, sleep architecture, and body composition.
All of that, I have experienced all of that on a Tuesday.
For men, the picture is different but real. Testosterone levels decline gradually from around 30, but the compounding effects of that on muscle mass, energy, mood, and metabolic rate become much more noticeable in the 40s. Research from the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism has documented this clearly.
So we're not imagining things. Our hormones are genuinely shifting, and that has downstream effects on basically everything.
Correct. And then layer on top of that what sleep researcher Dr. Matthew Walker, author of Why We Sleep, describes as age-related changes in sleep architecture. We get less deep, slow-wave sleep as we age, less of the restorative kind, which is why that recovery piece you mentioned feels harder.
Can I just say, realizing that my 40-year-old sleep is structurally different from my 30-year-old sleep changed how I talk to myself about being tired. It's not weakness, it's biology.
Right, and that mindset shift matters because the response to it should be adaptation, not shame. Let's dig deeper into what adaptation actually looks like. Strength training is probably the most well-evidenced place to start.
Y'all, if you've been waiting for permission to lift weights, consider this your moment, because I resisted this for years.
The research here is quite compelling. A meta-analysis published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine found that resistance training significantly preserves muscle mass and metabolic function as we age, and the benefits are disproportionately large for people starting in their 40s compared to later. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who specializes in muscle-centric medicine, argues that skeletal muscle is essentially your largest metabolic organ and your best insurance policy for aging well.
And I'll be honest, I spent my 30s doing cardio almost exclusively. I thought that was what healthy looked like. Starting strength training at 41 was humbling, but the difference in how I feel now, not even comparable.
Which brings up an important nuance. This isn't about aesthetics. It's about metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, bone density, and cognitive function. There are studies linking muscle mass in midlife to lower rates of dementia. Dr. Wendy Suzuki at NYU has done fascinating work connecting physical activity to hippocampal growth.
Okay, and this feels like a good moment. If this kind of conversation is useful to you, please like and subscribe to the Wellness Rhythm Show. We do this every week, and your support keeps us going.
Genuinely appreciated. Now, here's where Emma and I actually see this slightly differently. Emma, you've been very enthusiastic about tracking. HRV, sleep scores, all of it. And I find myself more skeptical.
I knew you were going to bring this up.
The data on consumer wearables is genuinely mixed. A 2023 paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association reviewed several popular devices and found significant variability in accuracy. My concern is that for some people, particularly those already prone to anxiety, constant biometric monitoring creates stress that may outweigh the benefits.
And that is a fair point. Here's the thing, though. For me, the tracking reduced anxiety because I could see patterns. I stopped thinking something is wrong with me and started thinking, oh, I always sleep worse after a late dinner. That specificity helped.
Which illustrates individual variation perfectly. The evidence suggests tracking can be valuable when it informs behavior change and counterproductive when it becomes the goal itself. Know which one you are.
That's actually really good advice. Okay, let's talk about the stress piece, because I think this is the one that sneaks up on people in their 40s, specifically. The sandwich generation reality is real.
The allostatic load concept is useful here. Dr. Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University developed this framework, essentially the cumulative wear on the body from chronic stress. And the 40s are often peak load: career pressure, aging parents, children who still need you, financial complexity. The physiological cost of chronic cortisol elevation in this period is well documented, including its effects on sleep, immune function, and abdominal fat distribution.
Abdominal fat distribution. David just described why I cannot shift weight around my middle no matter what I eat. Cortisol. Cortisol is doing that.
Partly, yes, and the intervention isn't more restriction, it's stress physiology management, which includes sleep, social connection, and genuinely down-regulating the nervous system. Dr. Elissa Epple at UCSF has published extensively on this, including her book with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn on cellular aging and stress.
And the nutrition angle? Because I feel like 40s nutrition advice is all over the place. What does the evidence actually say?
The most consistent finding is protein intake. Research suggests that most adults, particularly women in perimenopause, are significantly under-consuming protein relative to what supports muscle preservation and metabolic health. Dr. Stacey Sims, an exercise physiologist who focuses specifically on women, recommends substantially higher protein targets than standard guidelines suggest, closer to 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight.
I started tracking protein about 8 months ago, and it was honestly a revelation. I was getting maybe half of what I actually needed, and I thought I ate well.
The other consistent evidence is around fiber and gut microbiome health. Research from the American Gut Project, led by Dr. Rob Knight, found that diversity of plant intake strongly predicts microbiome diversity, which in turn connects to immune function, mood regulation, and metabolic health.
30 different plants a week, that's their target. And before anyone panics, herbs and spices count. A sprinkle of cumin counts.
Lowering the barrier to entry matters enormously.
Okay, if I had to land on one thing, one genuinely practical takeaway from this whole conversation, it's this. Your 40s are not a warning sign. They are a signal. Your body is giving you real, measurable information and asking you to adapt. The people who thrive in their 50s and 60s are largely the ones who listened in their 40s.
I'd add, the adaptation doesn't require an overhaul. The Stanford research, the sleep science, the strength training data, it all points towards consistent, targeted adjustments, not heroic transformations. Start with protein and one resistance session a week if that's where you are. The evidence supports the small, sustained moves.
Y'all, this decade is genuinely one of the most important for your long-term well-being. Not because it's the end of something, but because it's the beginning of you understanding how your body actually works.
Brilliantly put, and somewhat optimistic even by my standards.
This show is part of the VoxCrea.AI system. If you want a show like this for your organization without building it yourself,
go to VoxCrea.AI and request a sample episode.